Hello and welcome to ESO Vault. Today I've got a Dragonknight build for you that uses two 5-piece crafted sets. That's right, two. So if you do crafting, and I honestly don't see why you wouldn't, this is easy to put together. If you don't do crafting, you're really going to make things hard on yourself. Today's build, Eruption, is interesting to me because it uses a spammable attack that you may not have considered. It also uses a gear set that has been way underneath the radar for a while. I'll give you a hint. It used to work well on the Necromancer class. Not anymore, unfortunately. I decided I'm calling these build/tutorial videos. I like the word tutorial because it pretty much says that the video is aimed at new or less experienced players. And I prefer tutorial versus calling it a guide because I'm not trying to do a comprehensive, all-inclusive video here. I don't want to make a video that long, and you probably don't want to watch one that long. Okay, let's go ahead with today's Dragonknight build, Eruption. Here on the character sheet, you can see that the character is an Imperial. A quick word about race. Play the race you want to play. Unless your goal is to be at the top of the leaderboards, it doesn't matter much which race you choose. Stat-wise, the only race that doesn't have any bonuses that would help a stamina damage dealer is Breton. So maybe it would be better to say avoid Breton on this one, and save that for when you know you're doing a magical build. Over on the left, you see I've got 64 points in stamina. No surprises there. Most of the time, you're only going to divvy that up differently if you're doing a PvP build. I used to scrutinize the numbers at the top of the character sheet when I was putting builds together. I stopped that almost completely. Anymore, I only usually look at three things, and that's my health, my stamina recovery, and my critical chance. That's because if I built the character correctly, everything will fall into place without me having to fiddle around with it. I like critical chance to be somewhere in the 40s without my buff potion, and with decent gear, that's where it falls pretty much every time. I look at health because I really want that to be at least 20,000. Sometimes I get by with less, but I've been playing this game a long time. If you need more of a cushion, by all means, give yourself more health. There's nothing wrong with that. Stamina recovery isn't really a question of what the raw number is, but is it enough for that character? Some builds and classes are more thrifty than others. The only real test is whether it works or it doesn't. That's how you know if you need more recovery. This depends on what I'm doing too. My recovery numbers generally fall into a range which is acceptable for dungeons. Not surprisingly, since that's my favorite content and what I do most. Other things on the sheet just don't come into play for a PvE damage dealer. Your resistances don't really matter unless you're the tank. I'll continue to rail against penetration. Players have probably wasted millions of hours of combined time fretting over penetration. Beyond the fact that I like to have a source of major fracture in the build, I never give a thought to it. If you're new to the game and you're curious, you can ponder those numbers, but just know that I don't reference the character sheet as I put builds together. What's the part of the build that I put most of my effort into? It's always the same. Skills, skills, skills. Did I say that enough for emphasis? A couple more things before I move on to skills, though. Down at the bottom of the character sheet, it shows that my buff food is lava foot soup and salt rice. If you don't have the recipe, you can buy this from guild traders. My Mundisto is the thief, which gives me increased critical chance. Don't take the lever for more penetration. I don't care where you read it or who told you to. Don't take it. Before I get into skills, I need to mention that this is a traditional 2-bar build that does involve light attack weaving. If you're new and the prospect of light attack weaving seems like a lot to handle, I would say give it a shot first. You don't actually need to be that good at light attack weaving to be successful with 2-bar builds. If you're trying to hit damage numbers like the pros, then yes, you'll have to do it well. Otherwise, just do it as well as you can, and you'll be surprised at how far that'll take you. One more thing, I like to have one bar be my range bar, and the other bar be the melee or damage bar. Also, I almost always slot the same skill or type of skill in the same place. That way I can switch between characters with ease. For instance, here on my bow bar, the two skills on the left are always ground AoE skills. I know I'll have to target them at the enemy's feet. My heal is always in the middle, and buffs or single target ranged attacks are typically on the right. The order I use the skills in, the various slots, never changes on the ranged bar. It really just becomes an exercise in muscle memory. Once you get an order set up that works for you, try to keep it. That's how the fights don't descend into button mashing insanity. I'm just pushing the buttons in the order I push them thousands of times. That way I can pay attention to more pressing things like the boss is targeting me because the tank didn't hold aggro or something else important. Alright, make a mental note that every skill I talk about is supposed to be preceded by a light attack. Okay, finally, on to the actual skills. First is Flames of Oblivion, which is a class skill that launches fireballs at enemies and gives me major savagery just for having it slotted. Next is the bow damage over time skill Poison Injection. This does extra damage to low health targets. After that I cast Eruption, which is the build's namesake skill. Eruption does damage with a scorching cloud of ash, but more importantly it gives me and my group the minor brutality buff. This is a buff that's unique to the Dragonknight class. Casting an Earthen Heart ability will activate the buff. This is basically free damage, and your group will appreciate it because the only way they can get it is from a Dragonknight. Last on this bar, I cast Endless Hail. Great area of attack skill, plus it buffs my weapon damage when the bow has the infused trait and a weapon damage enchantment. And yes, I'll probably mention that in every single video because it's that important. My heal is Resolving Vigor, if I need it. Go PvP or buy it, but be sure to get it. Last skill I can cast on this bar is my ultimate if it's ready. Standard of Might does great damage and buffs my damage for 20 seconds by 15%. Okay, on to the dual wield bar. First I'll use Barb Trap, which gives me the minor force buff and increases my weapon damage just for having a fighter's guild ability slotted. Next I'll use Venomous Claw, which is a single target damage over time skill. This is another skill in the Dragonknight class kit. Next is Deadly Cloak from the dual wield line. Deadly Cloak does damage to enemies around me while causing me to take less damage from area attacks. Deadly Cloak is the best skill in that skill line. Use it. Okay, I hinted that I was using an odd skill for a spammable. That's Noxious Breath. This is traditionally used as a dot and a source of major fracture. Noxious Breath does enough damage though that I can spam it and it strikes any targets in the area, so it's great for multiple enemies. Here I'm going to use it twice in a row. Because I have Molten Whip slotted and I just used 3 Ardent Flame abilities, I've increased my weapon damage by 300 and now I'll cast Molten Whip for 60% extra damage. Then I'll use Noxious Breath 3 more times and then cast Molten Whip again. If I'm doing this right, it's easy to tell because the animation of Molten Whip changes. The back and forth between Noxious Breath and Molten Whip does more than buff my damage. It also works with one of my gear sets, and I'll talk about that in that section. Last skill but not the least, I have Flawless Dawnbreaker slotted to passively increase weapon damage and uses a cheap ultimate when I need it. When in doubt, slot this on your damage bar. It's hard to beat that 3% passive buff to weapon damage. That's it for skills. Now I mentioned that this rotation works with my gear, but it will work with any gear. So if there's a takeaway from the video for you, make it the skills and the order they're cast in. That's the important part here. So now that you've got all the skills, let's put it together by taking this guy apart. No Meg Ryan's got to be the stupidest danger ever, which makes him perfect as a target dummy. If I didn't tell you I'm using potions for the major brutality buff, those also give you the major savagery buff, which I don't need because the build gets increased skills. Notice when I use my Molten Whip, the character does a little flip. That's an extra strong Molten Whip, and it lets me know if I'm doing my rotation right. In case you didn't catch it already, this build doesn't use an execute skill. That's right, no changing skills. I just plow through to the end without changing my rotation. I let my health get a little low here at the end. Occasionally I accidentally let No Meg Ryan kill me, which is really embarrassing. Sorry, big guy, not this time. I'll use combat metrics to pull up the stats. 39,900. How annoying. It couldn't just be an even 40,000. Plenty of damage for just about any content you're interested in, though. Up in the green numbers, there's a buff called Seething Fury. Seething Fury is what I get when I cast an Ardent Flame ability, and I talked about that buffing my damage and the Molten Whip skill. It stacks a maximum of 3 times, and it looks like I had 3 stacks 88% of the time. Right below that, there's a buff called Range Supremacy, and it was up 92% of the time. That comes from gear. I'll get to that in a minute. Berserker was up 90% of the time, and that's the old name for the weapon damage buff I get from my bow and the Endless Hail skill, just in case you're wondering how that worked into things. Okay, starting at the top of the gear, you see that I've got two Order's Wrath daggers, and that's a crafted set from the high aisle. Both have the precise trait, and one has flame damage on it, and the other has poison. That's a 5-piece set, and you can have somebody make it for you. It doesn't get any easier than that. Next, I have a Maelstrom Perfected Bow, and that's not so easy. Good news is you can leave it out. Just run an Order's Wrath bow. I'm wearing one piece of the Slimecraw monster set, and that gives me a crit chance bonus. That's the largest single piece crit bonus in the game, so get that from Wayrest Sewers as soon as you can. Okay, we've arrived at the big mystery set, Diamond's Victory, which is another crafted set. This comes from Blackwood, and I was reminded of this during the Blackwood event we just had. Diamond's Victory gives you two buffs. Melee skills trigger range supremacy, and ranged attacks trigger melee supremacy. These give a tremendous damage boost to the respective skill types. But what this is going to work with is a mystery, because not all skills trigger the buffs you think they should, and it's not always clear what's a ranged skill and what isn't, or what's a melee skill or not. The good news is it works with this rotation on this character, as you just saw. Don't think too hard about it. If you want to use it, just go with it. Next, I've got the Velati Mage's Amulet, which helps a ton with light attack weaving issues. I'm running this on a lot of builds ever since I moved and my connection to the server went to shit. If you're new, just omit this item and run a 2-piece monster set or another mythic if you've got one you want to run, or run 2 pieces of another set. The jewelry is bloodthirsty with weapon damage and chance. Body gear is all medium with the Divine's trait. With crafted gear, you can have all the right traits right out of the gate. Bad news is you or somebody else will have to do some jewelry crafting here. Don't have these sets? Can't get them? No big deal. Run Hunting's Rage and Spriggans if you want, or whatever. But get your skills leveled and slotted and practice that rotation with every damn monster you run into. Well, I've almost gotten to the end. Here you can see the 4 blue champion slottables: Fighting Finesse, Fighting Aura, Thaumaturge, and Wrathful Strikes. You may not have as many champion points as me, but you actually don't need nearly as many to slot these. You can see right away I have points in things I don't even have slotted. Work with the points you have and fill out your champion constellations as you get more points. And that takes us to the end of the video. Remember the key takeaways, and that's the skills and the rotation. Don't agonize over perfect rotations and gold gear, perfected arena weapons, and all that crap. Work with what you've got, and above all else, get out there and have fun. Thanks for watching the video. Hopefully you got something you can use out of it. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to like the video and subscribe. I'm Centurion, and you've been watching ESO Vault. Have a great day and enjoy your adventures in Tamriel.